What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Invincible. And in the last video, we basically left off with this scenario where Robot had basically killed this alternate reality version of Mark, had destroyed Angstrom Levy, and then basically left Mark there with seemingly all the different Viltrumites who had successfully conquered Earth in this alternate reality being left to believe that if they saw Mark here, that Mark was the one who killed everybody. And so, of course, Mark does the only thing that really makes sense. When all the Viltrumites, or at least one of the Viltrumites, come pouring in, that Mark has basically made himself look like this alternate reality counterpart. It's the smart move, right? It's the most genius thing to do. Make yourself look like this other guy, and then in turn, pass yourself off as that dude. And then basically just be like, you know, the only reason why this happened is because of how crappy the security is around here and all that kind of stuff, right? And then ultimately ends up bailing out, right? He just manages to escape. Now, a lot of this is, or at least seems to be, because the Viltrumites don't necessarily question their leader, right? They don't really question the Emperor. The Emperor's orders are kind of an absolute, sort of this dogmatic approach to how they view the people that, or at least the person that leads the Empire. And so kind of banking on that, Mark's able to make his escape and then basically goes in order to meet with what would normally be the location of the teen team, right? Like just like Adam, Eve, and all those different guys, all just kind of working together as their own superhero group. When he arrives there, while he is able to find Robot, in this alternate reality, things happen entirely different. That what had actually happened here is that this alternate reality version of Mark had killed Adam Eve. That the idea here is that much like we've seen in the main Invincible universe, they grew close, right? He was here on Earth, he was a superhero, all that kind of stuff. But when his father showed up and enlisted him in the mission of conquering the Earth in the name of the Viltrumite Empire, that Mark did it. Mark actually allied himself with his father and ended up destroying Adam, Eve, and seemingly the rest of his superhero teammates at the same time. And so it's one of those crazy things because he literally is responsible for the deaths of most all the superheroes on this world. Now, the funny thing is he basically spills the beans to Robot and is like, I'm not from this universe. Like, I'm not part of any of this stuff, right? Like, I'm from an alternate reality. All I want to do is get back home, but your version of Mark here in this reality, he's dead. So you don't really have to worry about him anymore, right? He's not going to be a major problem. And so Robot, of course, agrees to work with Mark. The second thing is that because there's so much information to deal with here, and because the technological advancements are so far, that Robot can only do so much. And so what they actually end up doing is enlisting the Mauler twins, or at least one of the Mauler twins in this alternate universe, because the other one had been destroyed by this version of Mark. Now, here's the funny thing about this. When the main Invincible universe Mark shows up here, he doesn't tell this guy that he's from an alternate reality, right? That he's from a different universe where he wasn't a villain and didn't kill his brother or anything like that. Instead, he just kind of lets him believe that he's basically turned over a new leaf, right? That things are different now, that he's seen the error of his ways and that kind of a thing. It's enough to get one of the Mauler twins on his side. And then in turn, they literally just kind of start going through and working on all this stuff. Now, the biggest issue is that with him being vacant from the Viltrumite Empire for days and weeks and months at a time, what he ends up doing is basically recording a message and saying that this, you know, that Robot and I, and we've all been working together on this whole thing to basically take the information of Angstrom Levy and expand the Empire into other dimensions. But now that they know it's going to work, they're holding me hostage, right? And so until they're able to make their escape to some alternate dimension, I have to stay here, you know, I'm trapped. And then like once everything's done, then I'll basically, you know, I'll end up using their information and then we'll either hunt them down or we'll expand our empire or whatever. And he's just like in broadcast, right? So obviously it's a very, very loose explanation here, but it seems as though the Viltrumites had basically bought it. And the reason why is because while you do have Robot that takes the body of one of the Invincibles and then basically starts injecting his mind into it so he can essentially kind of operate as their leader effectively by basically duplicating Mark himself in terms of physical appearance, that all the Viltrumites start showing up. And the reason why is because as far as they're concerned, their leader is basically in danger. And they would much rather see the entire experiment destroyed and their leader survive than let their leader stay there and see the entire experiment come to success. And so what they end up doing here, and this is one of the things that really starts to freak out Robot and the Mauler twin, is that they've brought quote unquote the monster. That in this alternate reality, what had happened is that Robot had never found a way to basically slow down and really even just stop the aging process of Monster Girl. And so as a result, she kept getting younger and younger. And now she's basically an infant. But remember, the younger that Monster Girl gets, the more powerful her monster form becomes. And that's why when they unleash her, right, they literally just throw her out there and then she just starts freaking out, not knowing what's going on, and basically turns into her monster form. This form is gigantic. It's just colossal in size, right? I mean, this thing is just, it's enormous, right? Hundreds of feet tall, if not close to a solid 1,000. And so because of this, like, they're like, we have to go, right? We have to get out of here. Now, this basically leads to the portal being activated and Mark being able to go back home. And then you basically have a robot who ends up taking over or just kind of appearing in the form of Mark and saying, no, this all has to be stopped, right? You've ruined the experiment. This is a new dawn for the Viltrumite Empire. And we never really find out what happens with them directly, or at least not in this story. Instead, we basically pick up with Mark once he arrives back in the main Invincible universe, gets back home, and then sees Adam Eve, right? Now, Adam Eve, of course, has lost a whole bunch of weight here. She's still pregnant, but as soon as Mark arrives, she wants to have nothing to do with him. And the reason why is because he's been gone for 6 months. Now, this is not uncommon, and it's happened before. And in fact, even Adam Eve says that. It's not the fact that you've been gone for 6 months that's the reason why I'm so pissed off at you, right? I mean, that goes with the territory. You took off during the Viltrumite War. You were gone for a lengthy amount of time. What makes her so angry here is that Mark had gone after Angstrom Levy on the possibility that Angstrom Levy might come back at some point in time and might attack them. It was different when it was just Mark and Adam Eve, when it was just them. It's a whole different beast now when she's pregnant, when Mark has a child, because when that happened, and of course she basically took off the ring, like she's done. When that happened, what she came to was this realization that she couldn't be in a relationship with Mark and be raising a baby, worrying about whether or not Mark was going to like take off or something like that. That Mark now has a greater level of responsibility than he did before. He has a responsibility to their child, and it's not a responsibility that he seems to be acknowledging here. And so because that, Adam Eve is like, I'm done, right? Like we're done, we're finished. I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. Enter Anissa. Now, this is going to be one of the most controversial aspects of Invincible, right? One of the most controversial things. And I know a lot of you guys have been really, really curious about this. A lot of you guys have probably heard of this. So Anissa, as you guys know, or Anissa, whatever you want to call her, she's one of the Viltrumites, and she's really seemingly the only female Viltrumite there. More so than that, she hasn't really lived up to her bargain of basically procreating like she's supposed to. And most of that is due to the fact that she just hasn't really found a suitable partner, right? That pretty much all the men that she's seen around the world are just like average Joes going nowhere in life, at least in comparison to her. They're just not on her level. And so as a result of that, the only person she wants is Mark. Now, here's where things get exceedingly controversial. A fight breaks out between the two, and she makes it clear in no uncertain terms, we're gonna bang, and you're gonna be the means by which I start procreating this world, or start procreating in this world, right? You're gonna get me pregnant. Mark immediately rejects her, and it's like, no, that's not going to happen. But what she ends up doing is forcing herself on Mark. And it's not even one of those things where Mark's able to like successfully fight her off and successfully able to push her away. No, she's aroused by the fight that they're getting into, which is basically getting her more and more hot and heated. And then once she's able to successfully pin Mark, she forces herself on Mark, and then in turn, basically sexually assaults him. And so as a result of that, like Mark is kind of left in this almost broken state, right? I mean, he's just kind of left crying, left in pieces, and she's just like, man up, right? It'll probably take a few times, Mark, but like, I'll see you soon, right? Like, I want to do this a few more times until I actually get pregnant, right? So one, not only did she assault him in that capacity, she also made it clear she's going to come back several more times and do it again, whether he wants to or not. Now, one of the things that Robert Kirkman does here, and that's what's so interesting about this, that Mark's reaction to this is such that he doesn't break down the way that you would probably expect him to, but it does have a massive effect on him. And it's one of those things where he doesn't really make it clear. Instead, he immediately takes off and goes running to Cecil at the Pentagon. Now, I would surmise part of this is because focusing on something other than what just happened basically gives him the ability to pretend like it didn't happen, or to give it no real thought whatsoever and to not acknowledge what he had experienced. But talking with Cecil, what he says is like, there's a massive problem here, right? Like, Robot is basically going to conquer the world. And that's the crazy thing, is that when Robot actually shows up, right? When Rex shows up here, like Mark warned Cecil, he's like, no, this is a bad guy, right? Like, Rex is not what you think he is. Like, we thought that he was going to be here, like he was a hero, that he was here to save us, but whatever happened in his time out there in the Flaxen Empire changed him, right? And his idea is he wants to conquer the world. He wants to take the whole thing over. And that's what's so crazy, is because Rex doesn't deny it, right? When Cecil's like, okay, like these kind of things you guys are lobbing at each other, this warrants a longer discussion. And Robot's like, God, I really wish it hadn't come to this. And then just slashes the throat of Cecil, like literally just rips it open. And then like where Cecil's just laying there bleeding on the ground, like Rex just like smashes his head, just stomps on his head and smashes it. And then a kind of fight breaks out between him and Mark. But remember, Rex knows how to overcome Mark. That where Mark basically destroys this robot, remember, it's just a shell, right? It's just a thing that's there. That Rex does not actually exist inside that robot. That seemingly, while I wouldn't say the motivation motivations of Rex all the way back when he took on a human form and then basically started using robots to do his bidding. Well, I wouldn't say that the intention of doing that was to conquer the world. I would say that intention was to basically ensure that he could always be there to fight alongside his teammates, because it wouldn't actually be his physical form. He wouldn't die. That if his robot form was destroyed, he would just send another one, and then another one, and another one, and another one. But instead, that decision actually came to benefit Robot insofar that with his intention to take over the world, it's almost impossible to destroy him now, because when he basically tells Mark, I know your weakness, meet me at your house, essentially indicating he's going after Adam Eve, that Mark races off. And that's when like the beans get spilled even to Adam Eve. That Robot's like, yes, Mark, like I'm basically taking over everything, but I'm gonna make the world better. Humanity doesn't want to be better, so I will make humanity better, right? I will drag them into progress, kicking and screaming if I have to, but it will happen. And that's kind of the crazy thing, is because when he admits to killing Cecil in front of Adam Eve, then it's not even one of those things where like Mark's delusional, losing his mind, going after his friend or anything like that. It's like, yeah, I killed Cecil. He would have stood in my way, so he had to go, you know, and that's just the way it is. Pretty bleak when you think about it. Because Rex knows how to overcome Mark, when the fight breaks out between the two, Rex does the exact same thing that he did before. He emits a sonic pulse. And because of the fact that the sonic pulse is the weakness of the Viltrumites, that while Mark is able to overcome, or at least able to punch that robot, the stance, or really the information given to Mark here is, the more you punch me, the harder you hit, the more intense the pulse is going to become. Mark doesn't believe him, he punches him, and then the pulse becomes crippling. And so when the question is asked by Adam Eve, like, why are you doing this? His response is shut up, and he rips her leg off of her body, right? Like literally just rips the leg off of Adam Eve. And at this point, she's just laying there basically bleeding to death. And so she uses her powers for a brief moment, even though she's not supposed to, because remember, using her powers could potentially kill the baby, and then basically gives them a kind of out, right? A kind of escape. They immediately bail out as fast as they possibly can. They just take off. They fly into space. And with Mark having made his escape, that Rex in his human form is watching all this unfold and is like, okay, I really wish it hadn't come to this, because with Mark escaping and Adam Eve escaping, the superhero community trusts them. And so if they go back to Earth and they start telling the superheroes what it is that I'm doing, then the superheroes are going to unify against me. So he's like, very well, let the slaughter begin. And so at that point, when you have Mark and Adam Eve, who basically end up flying out to the Viltrumite base on the moon, right? Adam Eve has to kind of use her powers to create a force field, and they arrive there in front of Nolan, and Mark's like, you have to help me. This is when the massacre starts, because at that point, you basically have Robot who's kind of like, okay, here are all the people that could essentially stand in my way. And without giving any real explanation whatsoever, he travels to every single one of these people and executes them all. No questions asked. He just kills every single one of them. He doesn't ask questions. He doesn't like try to get them to understand where he's coming from. It's just a full-on outright massacre. Now at that point, he actually ends up calling in Monster Girl and doesn't necessarily tell her what it is that he's doing. He's just kind of like, you know, I had this genius idea that when we were part of the Flaxen Empire, that yes, I kind of got carried away with myself. Yes, I did some things that I'm not proud of, but we made mistakes, but we can fix those. We can do better this time. And there are things that we can do that would basically make this world better, that was different than what we did on the Flaxen Empire, right? Basically having this discussion about how he just imagines himself conquering the world, fancies himself basically eliminating anybody out there who's the competition. And while he's having this conversation with Monster Girl, she has no idea. He's massacring everybody, all these superheroes across the world. He's just killing them all. And it's just, she's totally oblivious. I mean, it even gets to the point where like he annihilates the Pentagon. And so during this whole thing, that's when it dawns on Monster Girl, oh my God, like he's doing this right now. Like this whole plan he has for like how to basically conquer the world, that they'd have to remove anybody that could get in their way and all that kind of stuff. He's running over that right now. Like he's literally doing that as we speak. And once she realizes what's happening, she begins to freak out. Now notice, she doesn't attack, and that's because she loves him. Despite everything that's happened, she loves him. So she's not going to just readily attack him right off the bat. Instead, she tries to understand what's going on. And she even goes as far as to say, right, like Monax, her son from Flaxen, tried to tell her that Rex was a monster, but she didn't want to believe it, right? She didn't want to believe that it was actually true. But then she gets angry, and then like just wrath begins to set in once Rex makes his case and saying like, yes, right, like I knew how deeply you had betrayed me, and yes, I ordered the deaths of all those different Flaxens across the world, right, across the entire Flaxen race. Anybody out there who was basically tied to the royal family, the woman who had your child, I had all of them killed. And yes, I tried to have your son killed too. And so where he's like, am I a monster? Yes, but that only really means you and I have a lot more more in common than we thought before. And so it's one of those things where when she says like, why would you do this? I loved you. He realizes the past tense of that statement, that loved. Okay, so you're not going to work with me here. And so in turn, he brings in his robots and basically drags Monster Girl away, right? Takes her away. And then it's one of those crazy things where he says, you know, there's no point in struggling here, but I want you to remember, Monster Girl, above all else, you betrayed me first. And then in turn has them carry her away and then eject her into space. Then he tries to have her killed, right? He literally has her just shot out into space where there's no oxygen and no ability for her to breathe. And while there is more to this story, you know what? I think this is a great place for a cliffhanger. I think this is a great place for a cliffhanger, Rob Core. I love you guys so much. I'm sorry. I have to do this. I have to cliffhang you. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.